Hi, I'm Alex Winter, and you're listening to the Cinematography Podcast.
The following podcast contains explicit language. You're listening to the Cinematography Podcast presented by Hot Rod Cameras, a program about the art, craft, and philosophy of the moving image and the people who make it happen. Coming to you from the world headquarters of Hot Rod Cameras in Hollywood, California, are your hosts, Ben Rock and Ilya Friedman.
Hey, Ben, this is a first for us.
What are we doing? Who are you? I don't even know what I'm looking at.
You're looking at me. We're actually revealing what we typically do where no one else can see us, which is, this has been an audio podcast for, 9 years now.
Oh, my God.
I know, 10 years in February. So, we are actually letting people see a little behind the curtain. And I think it's very, very timely because who's on the show today?
Alex Winter, the one and only Alex Winter.
Returning again to talk about his new movie called The YouTube Effect. And we are also going to post this video on YouTube. So our editor, Ben Katz, is going to have extra work. He's going to be cutting the audio version and then also the video version, which should be pretty much identical. So Ben, a couple months ago, back in June, I went to the VidCon convention in Anaheim for 2023, and I gave a little bit of a report, but I did promise that I would do something a little bit more in-depth this time versus I would do something more in-depth about the convention because we didn't really have time to get into all of it. And oh man, was there a ton of stuff to talk about. And this is not going to be a comprehensive report of VidCon.
So this is a few months ago, so this is all completely obsolete now anyway, right? Because, in a month, the whole thing changes.
There is some truth to that in the very, very fleeting nature in which social media and web-based content continues to morph and change. Yeah. It's true. There is new stuff that has come to be, but I will tell you that the inflection point that we are at right now continues, and it's a very, very interesting time.
It continues to inflect. It's inflecting like all hell.
It is. It doesn't stop inflecting. So I want to play a couple of clips just to kind of give our audience the flavor. I want to start off with a little soundbite here from Joshua Cohen, who is one of the co-founders of TubeFilter, which is a very famous website. And he talks a little bit about, I'm sure you remember, you're of a certain age. You can remember like Larry H. Parker or Jacoby and Myers, some of these, ambulance chasing, big advertising law firms that were extremely popular in Los Angeles. Well, there's a trend that's going on right now nationwide, and I'm going to let Joshua Cohen just sort of explain it. So here goes.
All right.
So to be specific, this is a video from YouTuber Element X, who's a Minecraft gamer with around 475,000 subscribers. He nets around 400,000 views per video. This one did particularly well for him. He has 1.2 million views and counting on that one. It's from February. And it was sponsored by Morgan & Morgan, which is one of the biggest law firms in the country. They have over 3,000 employees, 800 lawyers, operating in 49 states, and since 1988 claim to have generated over $15 billion in claims for its clients. About 6 or 7 months ago, it started sponsoring a lot of content on YouTube.
I'm here to talk about the best legal representation you can get from today's sponsor, Morgan & Morgan.
If you're ever injured in an accident, you can check out Morgan & Morgan.
I wish I had known about Morgan & Morgan.
I want to thank today's sponsor, Morgan & Morgan.
Today's sponsor is Morgan & Morgan.
Today's video is sponsored by Morgan & Morgan.
I've been challenged to put a plunger on all 26 mile markers of the LA Marathon by Morgan & Morgan.
We actually found 226 Morgan & Morgan sponsored videos with over 50,000 views uploaded this year. That's 1.32 sponsored videos per day.
Yeah, that first clip, that's a Minecraft YouTuber who's making Minecraft videos who interrupts his Minecraft video play to do a commercial by Morgan & Morgan attorneys at law.
It seems a little odd because, correct me if I'm wrong, but the target audience of those Minecraft videos is probably, let's say, kids under 15.
It would seem like it, but clearly Morgan & Morgan knows something about the viewers of some of these channels that maybe...
I got to say, I end up watching a lot of these freaking, Minecraft videos with my son who is 5. And, not that I have any ambulances that currently need chasing, but
I thought this was a good clip and very sort of representative of the type of high-level research and information that is coming out through this creator economy that isn't really being proliferated through, traditional media, traditional news sources. So the industry is becoming very self-reflexive. There's a lot of data, and some of that's getting out there about how the world is sort of changing and where the advertiser dollars are shifting. Like in the past, a Morgan and Morgan might have really been considering like Super Bowl ads. Now it's,
I always equate the maybe not Morgan and Morgan, but in general, kind of the ambulance chasing videos as like late night, like, you fell asleep watching TV and you woke up at 3 a.m. and there was an infomercial about them. Like, I feel like they always were the bottom feeders of airtime.
It seems like that, but it's very interesting to find 200 plus videos which Morgan and Morgan have sponsored. With
I wonder what that means. Do they talk about how much money they're putting into them?
You can only imagine, because when YouTube creators have hundreds of thousands of subscribers, their ask goes way up. It's a lot of money to buy that sort of advertising, but it's an interesting form of direct advertising, direct to the creator, that in the past didn't really exist, because exactly like you're talking about, sort of like late night television, that ad buy would most likely go to a local television station. It would go to, so a regional player at best, and it would get inserted in space that regional player had blocked out. So now an individual, Minecraft gamer is that advertising agency and is collecting that money and is, seemingly negotiating the rates for that on their own. So it's probably a little all over the map, but it's a very, very interesting trend. And I will say that this is only sort of like tip of the iceberg, and we don't have time to get into all of it, but I want to play the next soundbite from a gentleman named Matthew Patrick, who's better known as Matt Pat on the interwebs. And Matt Pat is one of these incredibly famous YouTubers, not someone who actually I have to admit, I'd never seen a Matt Pat video before being in the same, convention center ballroom and having him speak about his channel being acquired by, Scandinavian venture capitalists who'd come to this country and said, here's a bunch of money. They didn't reveal exactly how much it was, but it's been reported to be, somewhere in the $8 to $90 million range. So who knows?
Oh my God.
It's not an insignificant
buys a lot
amount.
of IKEA shelves.
It certainly does. So that company that invested in Matt Pat is going to change in some ways what he's doing, but in other ways not completely rewrite the rule book. And just today actually is the Streamy Awards, in which Matt Pat was hosting. And I'll talk more about the Streamy Awards later, but let's hear this little clip from Matt Pat.
We sold because the business was growing to a size where Steph and I were like, we were accidental entrepreneurs. We got into this space because I needed a job and I needed to prove to people that I could make stuff that was interesting, and I needed a resume item. And bit by bit over time, we're like, hey, let's make this into what it can truly become. It became a business. It became not one person or one couple's YouTube channel. It became a business with employees and payrolls and taxes and this and that. And it got to a size where it was overwhelming. It was a lot. And it was a lot to balance that against the creative demands and the deliverables that we had to do on a week-to-week basis. And so I think, if anything, what I miss is like the simplicity of the earliest days, but this sort of acquisition and this sort of partnership helps us get back to that. Because now all of a sudden, Steph and I aren't having to be in the weeds about taxes and payroll and HR.
Our only priority and our only loyalty is to the content and to the audience. Yeah. And that's, who could ask for more than that? Right,
and so that, I think, is the ideal, and that's why we've been able to kind of reset it back to that.
So, it's really interesting because you hear a lot about the YouTube burnout, and you hear a lot about the creator economy, about these people have now, gone so far into this. Mr. Beast was just complaining, actually, right before he won, a Creator of the Year at the Streamy Awards for the third time, that he's suffering major burnout, and that his whole purpose on this earth is to make videos. But
I would so prefer them to say videos than to say our number one priority was to our content. Ugh.
Yeah, I know, but that's kind of an old man thing, though. That's an old man thing. You're being an old man right now, because content has become a catch-all. Some of it is video. much of it is video, but not all of it. And it can be all kinds of things. I mean, I hesitate to call like a 6-second or a 10-second, TikTok that goes viral, a video. It's not really a video. That is something maybe, reduced or less
I
than.
agree. I have more than once ranted about just my objection to the idea
Semantics.
that we make content. Like right now we're making a podcast, and is it content? Sure, but that's not. We're not making some filler for the podcast tubes. We're communicating something that we think is important to us, or we wouldn't be doing it, right?
That's true. And I think it's very interesting because the way that we define all of these things, I think going forward in the future is going to be really important, just because if we aren't more specific, there's going to be a lot of confusion, and there's going to be a whole lot of extra words being wasted needlessly, when really, if we just use the correct terminology for things, everyone's going to be able to understand each other so much better. So in this last clip, we got two people, Jamie Rossroth, who is and I may have mispronounced that. I apologize, Jamie, if you ever hear this. Basically was a YouTube creator who had about 1 million subscribers and then dropped out, and then came back as an entrepreneur selling a service, which is basically a consulting, coaching sort of business for people who want to grow their channels, but also something that I think is very interesting, because I think a lot of people who are doing this don't even understand that the moment they don the professional cap, professional YouTuber, they are a business and they have to concentrate on doing things differently. And then the other voice we're about to hear is from Eric Way, and he is the founder or co-founder of a company called Carrot. And Carrot is positioning itself as a fintech financial organization, specifically trying to help people inside the creator economy. And let's go with it. I'll play it right now.
The skills required to be a really good creator are so opposite from being a good manager, approving holidays, approving sick days, ensuring they're punctual. Just all of that stuff is the opposite of showing you around $1 billion yacht like Mr. Beast will do or something like that. So I think maybe just like accepting that and really stepping aside and saying, right, how am I going to acquire these skills? How am I going to become a good manager and marry that with the content creation is what I'd say.
If you're a creator, you're a business. Why did you then decide to shift from being a creator into an entrepreneurial founder raising money? Now, that's a two-part question for each of you.
Yeah, what I think is really interesting about both these people, and he's just giving you this little bit of a sample, because they're on panels and being presenting panels where people are talking about sort of the new creator economy, like, because there have already been 5 or 6 different waves of this, with Hollywood coming in and sort of traditional media, and now a lot of these people who have achieved a certain level kind of doing it for themselves and actually hiring and bringing in people, a lot of whom worked in traditional entertainment, particularly in reality television, because reality television aligns very, very closely in some ways with the creator economy, in that reality television really has sort of like the two big prong effect, the same way as YouTube. There's a lot of stuff that's out there for entertainment, and there's a lot of stuff that's out there for utility or education. And that's very, very true in the different sorts of channels that exist out there all across cable, and of course even in the prime time for reality television. You had your bachelors and bachelorettes and your Fear Factors and your contest type of shows, as well as sort of your home improvement shows, your DIY networks, your home and garden televisions and Discoveries, and your Shark Weeks. So you have that's very much like what's going on YouTube, and people who are creating one of or the other of this genre of content are no longer doing it at a hobbyist level. It is progressed now to the point where they cannot do it all themselves. They must employ appropriate people to work together as a team, very similar to the way that production companies and studios are in the business of constantly churning out shows. It's happening now on slightly different levels, but there's a lot of similarities. And once you start to draw those connections and make the connections between what the creator economy and the traditional entertainment industry has done over the last 100 years, you really start to see that this is a burgeoning new area for entertainment. And I would like to say something like it's anyone's guess where it's going to go. I think actually we have a really good idea of where it's going to go, but it seems to be very generational. And if you really want to have like that generational split where there's a younger generation right now that is aware of all the biggest players, of all the biggest channels, of all the biggest stuff that exists on YouTube and in this creator economy. And I would say that there's another generation of people, I include myself in that, where it's comical to hear the names of these people because they ring zero bells. If you go click on the Streamy Awards, which is currently now been showing for about 48 hours on YouTube, and I think already has 1 million plus views, they will just do a rundown of all the famous people who were on that show, and I recognized 2 of like probably the 50 names.
Who were the 2?
The Rhett and Link from Good Mythical Morning, who are very old school people, and the host Matt Pat, who I was just talking about because he was doing a presentation at VidCon. So there was 2 of that entire long list of people who they went through there. And boy, do you feel old when here are all these people with tons, millions and millions and millions of subscribers and views and worldwide popularity, and I don't know them. It is an economy unto itself inside of its own space.
Yeah, it's very youth centric. And I once spoke to my dad about Smosh, and my father, and talking to my dad, who's an old broadcast guy though, like TV and radio guy, and he never heard of them. And I was trying to explain to him what Smosh was, and I was like, imagine. And it's not just Smosh, but it's a lot of these YouTube channels. Imagine Elvis or the Beatles or U2 or whatever at the top of their game when they were as famous as they ever could be, except nobody under the age of 25 maybe had ever even heard of them. Like, that's how nicheified it is. Where like these people have millions upon millions of viewers. Any TV series would be happy to get the kind of loyalty and viewership that a lot of these YouTube channels have, that a Mr. Beast has, or Smosh, or once upon a time PewDiePie, some of these people. And yet no one's ever figured out a way to make very much money, if any money at all, with them outside of YouTube. Like, it seems like their entire focus, I don't want to say that their entire utility, because they're human beings and they could go do interesting things with their lives, but where their success is lying is on this is in this one venue. And again, to kind of talk a little bit about what Alex Winter is about to mention and about his movie, The YouTube Effect, is that YouTube's kind of created a monopoly. There isn't anyone else that does this. Like, there are services like Vimeo that do something similar to YouTube, but not exactly. No one's making a living as a creator on Vimeo using Vimeo's proprietary algorithms and advertising Vimeo places. Vimeo is completely different in in all of those ways.
Yeah, it's because YouTube has a social media component to it that is, in some ways, its secret sauce. There's so many people who are engaging on it. It is also a search engine, and the fact that it is inside of the whole Google family, the number 1 search engine being Google, the number 2 being YouTube, means that I
use YouTube every day, every single day.
Yeah, I've heard many people now tell me that they search for answers on YouTube. Like they would much rather have their answer come in a video format than almost anything else. I feel
all
like
the time. Well, if I'm like stuck with an editing problem or something like that, if I'm in Premiere and I'm like, how the hell do I do blah blah blah? I don't go to Google. I go to YouTube, because inevitably somebody's made a tutorial about how to do it.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good place though for us to get over to the interview about the new Alex Winter movie, The YouTube Effect.
Let's do it.
The Cinematography Podcast interview.
Joining us now is returning champion Alex Winter. Alex has been on the show before to talk about Zappa and Showbiz Kids, and we are honored to have him back again to talk about his new documentary, The YouTube Effect. Ben and I are sitting down on video for something a little bit unusual. We don't do a
We've
lot
never
of video.
done one of these for YouTube.
Yeah,
we always do them for audio.
But we felt like because it's the YouTube effect, we ought to put this on YouTube. So we're going to put this on YouTube. So if you ordinarily listen to our podcast as an audio format, you can now actually watch us and see what our recording situation looks like week after week. So, hey,
my office is such a mess. I apologize to everyone.
Without further ado, Alex, thank you so much for coming back on the show. Great to see you again.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's good to be back, and we'll see how long this lasts on YouTube before they take it down.
All right, so
powers that be.
So look, for people who don't know, this movie is now available everywhere. It is now streaming, so anywhere you have streaming services, you can check this out. Alex, give our listeners the log line. Tell us about this movie. What it's about.
Well, it's basically an examination, hopefully a thorough examination, character-driven. It's a documentary, so it's putting faces and emotion and visuals to a story that I think is pretty important, that I haven't seen getting told. And that is the rise of YouTube as the largest media platform on the planet. It is really the largest media company on the planet, and it's owned by Google and really run by Google, which is the largest tech company on the planet and one of the largest companies, period. A profit, far beyond the GDP of most countries. So here you have Google being the number one most viewed website in the world, YouTube being the number two most viewed website in the world, both owned by the same company, not discussed that often in that context. It's been discussed in various ways. It's a big business story, which we cover. But what is the impact? What is the societal impact of a media platform that pervasive? That was really the kind of burning question that drove us to make the film.
I had a question when I was watching, because you interview the two guys from Smosh a lot, Ian and Anthony, and you directed the Smosh movie.
I did, for YouTube. Yeah.
Was it for YouTube? So
we shot it almost the whole movie at YouTube in Playa. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Now, were you drawn in to make? So that movie was probably about 10 years ago ish.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Were you drawn in to make that because you were aware of the YouTube sensation that was kind of brewing at that time, or did that kind of spark your understanding in any way of what was already a humongous industry at that time?
Well, the reality of it is I'm old, so my interest was sparked in 2006, and I began mentoring some people that were working with me in production, interns and PAs and stuff, who I sort of pushed towards YouTube in 2006. Some of whom became, not because of me, because of their own ingenuity and creativity, became titans within the YouTube creative space. So I was very aware of the growth of YouTube from the very, very beginning. And by the time I made, by the time I made the Smosh movie, my interest in making that and working with Anthony and Ian was that I'd been tracking those guys since probably 07, 08. And they were one of the first creative teams to monetize on YouTube from the very beginning. And build a brand that eventually sold and became an actual, like a mini conglomerate, doing games, doing all different kinds of offshoots from their original content. That was really fascinating to me. So, and the idea of working with them and making something within kind of that ecosystem, it was done with Awesomeness TV and with YouTube, and was also it was interesting to me. It was a way for me to kind of explore this new world. At the same time, we were lampooning kind of the world of the influencer, and with Michael Ian Black and other really talented people, and Anthony Ian themselves. So I've been tracking online communities for a very long time, really going back to the 80s, and started making documentaries because of my interest in online communities, even though now I've made them about different issues.
Interesting. And I mean, like you talked to both of those guys extensively during the film, but I feel like they're kind of an interesting spine to look at this through, because they're still doing it. And they've been doing it. YouTube launches in 2005, and they're kind of the old guard now somehow.
Yeah,
they still both seem very young to me, but they've been doing
it for very young. Yeah, and they just got back together. they had worked together for a million years, and then Anthony left Smosh, which within the YouTube world was quite a famous story unto itself, which we cover in the film. And we cover why he left, and we cover sort of his own personal crisis of conscience around the type of content he felt he needed to be making, the type of engagement he felt he needed to be doing with the fan base, which was giant at that time. And they've remained friends. It wasn't a friendship breakup, but there was a sort of an issue that Anthony had within himself. And we sort of track that. If you're a very successful YouTube influencer, there's this feeling of momentum that you can't stop. And if you stop, you're going to get replaced instantly, and you'll never regain the traction that you had. And that's a really specific phenomenon. I mean, you certainly have somewhat similar phenomena within the entertainment industry where, you know, what is my next job? I'm only as good as my last job. But the truth is, it's not really so much like that. You can disappear from the industry, do things, and come back. You know, maybe not for, you know, decades, but certainly for a year or two at a time. And I think there's a feeling within the YouTube ecosystem that there's only one YouTube. It's a monopoly. If you're and you capture enormous amounts of eyeballs, just vast, almost unimaginable amount, much more than most people in the entertainment industry do. So I think it was interesting for me to track, and important for me to track, as you said, two of the very first creators, you know, on the platform to succeed, who are still at it all these years later, and kind of what the implications of that have been for them personally.
Like yourself, I've been sort of tracking, you know, the rise of social media versus traditional media for a long time. I've attended VidCon several times, and I felt, though, that this year, and I kind of feel like right now, is this really interesting inflection point. And I'd really be curious to get your opinion on this, because there has been a lot of talk about the rise of the creator economy. There has been, you know, the whole traditional media investment into the creator economy with the MCNs and all of the sort of like, you know, build up and then collapse. And now, especially with like BuzzFeed and Vice and other collapses, there are pundits out there saying, oh, creator economy's dead. You know, traditional media is where it's at. You know, the traditional entertainment industry. I feel like YouTube is sort of occupying its own space, either education or entertainment, and that's really its two big cruxes. What do you say? What do you think about is the demise of creator economy completely overstated? Are there people who are just talking out of their rear? What's going on at this moment in time with, you know, the way that the traditional media and new creator, you know, economy kind of are smashing against each other?
It's a really good question, and it's kind of the crux of it all, right? And the answer to that question is, if traditional media is doing so great, why are we in the biggest labor crisis of this century right now?
Real.
And even the last century.
Yep. Yes, so true.
You know, everyone who writes for an outlet as a journalist is on the ropes if they even have a job anymore. And many people in our industry have left the industry because they can't sustain themselves doing this work anymore. It's been kind of turned into like, you know, the gig economy if you work in the industry. And I think that's why there's been, for the first time, so much sympathy towards the creatives in this strike, is because I think that for the first time, because of the internet and because of the labor crisis that's affecting people outside our industry, people realize that we're not the elite, right? That almost everybody, including some people they think of as major stars, are living paycheck to paycheck and barely sustaining themselves within this industry. And if you look at what happened over the last 20 years in our industry, and the kind of what many people consider a somewhat misguided or very one-sided shift into streaming and away from traditional forms of exhibition and distribution that don't monetize particularly well and haven't been thought through in that way. And so, you know, there are people making vast sums of money off of, you know, selling companies or just, you know, shifting huge amounts of content around. But that money is not making its way to the creative workforce anymore. And so that's not sustainable, and that will eventually crash those companies, which I think they're aware, which is why we're in 101 days of a strike. So I mean, these issues are not unrelated. They're completely related. And I will say that, you know, how can you argue that the influencer or content creator economy is dying when YouTube is coming out of the biggest profits of its history? TikTok is on fire. Sure, companies come and go and people's appetites shift. I think what is happening right now, in my very humble and maybe completely wrong opinion, just to caveat this, is that there's been so much change, and the human brain tends to be binary, right? It tends to go, well, it's either or. I think that's part of what got us into this mess in the first place. I think that the sort of legacy industries watched the rise of the internet and thought, holy cow, these kids on YouTube have 500 billion views on whatever music video or whatever piece of content, and they didn't understand that doesn't translate into our industry. It doesn't even translate into money most of the time. So there was this kind of awe and bedazzlement of this new technology. And in my opinion, the world is getting more bifurcated, which isn't a bad thing. There's room for all of these things. There is an ability to have an entertainment industry and a journalism traditional economy that functions at the same time as you have this sort of, as you called it, this ecosystem that YouTube has, which is very specific, and to some degree TikTok and other. TikTok doesn't monetize quite the same way. So I think it's not either or. I think that the mistake that we made in the entertainment industry was trying to mimic an industry that has very little to do with us in meaningful ways. It has more to do with us superficially. And the way YouTube monetizes is very, very different than the way Netflix, Amazon, Apple, and other streaming services monetize. And it's, these are not subscription. It's an ad-based model. It's not subscription. The content is a very different type of content. YouTube isn't producing their own content for the most part. They're more like a giant MTV where they just, they acquire content, they upload it, and they attach ad dollars to it. So I think that sort of misunderstanding of the rise of technology has created the crisis that we're in, as well as greed on the part of a handful of oligarchs who want to scoop up whatever they can while the getting is good. But I think that where we'll end up is a place where sort of all of these things should be able to survive. Whether they're allowed to survive, I think, is what we don't know yet.
One of the things that I love about your documentary was sort of that it kind of gives us sort of the good and the bad of, I wouldn't even say the good and the bad, but like a whole spectrum of YouTube. YouTube has given us massive stars, you talk about it, like Justin Bieber starts out on YouTube, but also, and it was the New York Times chronicled it in an amazing podcast called Rabbit Hole, the way the algorithm feeds people information leads them sometimes down horrible dark rabbit holes. That's the name of the podcast, was Rabbit Hole. I guess where are you where are you enthusiastically or ambivalently or otherwise when it comes to the potential impact of YouTube on our culture moving forward?
I think that one of the reasons that YouTube gets spoken about so seldomly or inaccurately is because it's so giant. I think that it's hard for people to wrap their hand around it. I was somewhat amused a couple years ago when I started working on this, and people were like, oh, well, what about TikTok? Isn't that like the hot new thing? And, YouTube has 4.6 billion views a day. And TikTok has billions and billions less than that. And YouTube is not just a place for kind of micro videos that can be uploaded and shared. It's all of our news. It's all of our entertainment. Both visual and audio. It's all of our music and all of our TV and all of our movies and all of our influencer content, and it's the repository of all of recorded human history, and it's a search engine.
So true.
and it is the largest media conglomerate on Earth by an order of magnitude, and that is, I think, so unimaginably giant that people can't get their heads around it. And I didn't even include a social media platform in that description, which is what often people refer to YouTube as. I don't even think of it as a social media platform. So it's, there was an article, I think even yesterday or today, about people are pushing back against the harms of these platforms, and YouTube isn't even mentioned in the article, and it is by far the biggest purveyor of the harms that they're talking about in the article. And it's just ignored. And that's partly by design. I mean, Google's not dumb, and they have enormous lobbying power, and they've spent a lot of money to get people to go away and leave them alone. And it's also by a general misunderstanding of technology and how it works and how we use it. To answer your question specifically, and the reason I gave such a long preamble is YouTube is so big and its influence is so pervasive that obviously, and it does a lot of good, an enormous amount of good, and intentionally it does a lot of good. They've made a lot of really good decisions about how they, diversify their creators, how they monetize their creators, etc. But obviously the harms are going to be big. Rabbit holing was an important thing to examine, and I'm glad it got examined when it was being talked about by a lot of people, especially around the advent of the recommender algorithm. But that's kind of a bygone problem. Like, we're in a new phase of YouTube's power and the power of disseminating and monetizing disinformation. And that's something that we look at very intently in the film, especially leading into an election year, which is that YouTube did a lot of work on the recommender algorithm. It's actually very hard, in my opinion, unlikely for you to be rabbit hole today, meaning that you go on YouTube with fairly blasé or naive motives, and you end up going down some incredibly radical path and you get radicalized. Someone who gets radicalized on YouTube today, it's because there are huge funded channels with millions and millions of followers that are being that have a bunch of ad money being pumped into them, that have massive followings, that have a very strong parasocial bond with their audience, that are spouting propaganda that is often being funded by some dark money coalition. And that's got nothing to do with an algorithm or a rabbit hole. That is much more to do with the fact that it's our biggest broadcaster on earth, and there are no guardrails. There's no standards and practices. There's no regulation. There's no real rules other than every once in a while they claim they're going to take certain types of content or people off. Like, they will boot Alex Jones off, but they'll leave Steven Crowder on. And Steven Crowder is calling for civil war and inciting violence and has millions of followers. So I think that's really the problem. And I think the best analogy is our previous industrial age, and exactly the way you phrased the question, which was, is it a good or bad thing? And you think about the automobile and think about how long it took once the automobile was being used by everyone all the time before we had seatbelts and before we could get the automotive industry to take responsibility for the harms that their product was causing people. And we're in exactly the same place right now with big tech.
Do you think that the solution, or a solution possibly, to the disinformation, to the state that we're in right now, is media literacy or some sort of YouTube literacy, social media literacy? I mean, should this be taught in schools? Should there be a, hey, welcome to YouTube, watch this before you go any further? If you had a crystal ball or could wave a magic wand, what do you think without putting up the guardrails so much that it stifles the ability to have this free platform where anyone can pretty much put whatever they want out there? What do you think? What do you think is going to be the way to keep people safe?
I think it's a number of things. I think we do need regulation. I think we do need antitrust law, and I think that there's a big difference between losing open platforms and having content that's much safer for people. It wasn't difficult for YouTube to deplatform Stefan Molyneux, the influencer who provoked the Christchurch, New Zealand shooting, which saw 51 people get murdered, and that shooter's manifesto was just pages and pages of how YouTube and Stefan Molyneux told him to do it. So Stefan Molyneux is no longer on YouTube. That is not preventing people from getting access to, really cool free content. That is someone who was, inciting people to extremist terrorism. So I think that there's a big area of room for maintaining freedom of content and basic safeguards. Another example is up until very recently, YouTube had a policy where they were not allowing content on the platform that promoted the Stop the Steal movement, right? The big lie, which was the reason for the January 6th insurrection. And YouTube was the largest driver of radicalization of J6 of any other platform. And so YouTube said, okay, well, that's not good. So they started removing that content until 2 weeks ago when they reversed that policy.
Oh, no.
And they were public about it. They said, we are no longer removing content that refers to the 2020 election as false. And this is as we go into an election cycle. So like these are really basic examples. This is like putting seatbelts in your car, having them there for a little while, saying, screw it. We're going to take the seatbelts out of the car. So I've got to start with the companies because there's so much more they could be doing to prevent, and YouTube, but all of them, to prevent the willful monetization of very dangerous propaganda that is usually funded by ideological, deeply pocketed interests. But then to your point, absolutely, we need education. And right now we don't really get that. We get a lot of what I would call well-meaning misinformation, right? Like let's dismantle Section 230, or which we could belabor, but there are a lot of protections that keep the internet working that people think would be an immediate fix to just making these companies liable and more accountable. And the internet is just far more complicated a beast than that. And so media literacy, internet literacy, I think less narratives around the algorithm and more narratives around what are people's incentives that are just pure business model incentives that are very human, very understandable. The algorithm just confuses people and makes them think like this stuff's like weird magic that happens in the tubes. But I think media literacy and disinformation literacy is super important to be educating not just kids but adults about.
Agree.
But to me, that just the hard part about that is I go like, who creates it and who enforces it? Because even though like I think I probably agree with almost everything you're saying, if not literally everything you're saying, Alex. It's I'm originally from Florida, and I look at some of the stuff that's going on in Florida right now, where the government is imposing things that are challenging basic, obvious truths, and it's super frustrating. So like, who could we even trust to help create a set of guardrails who wouldn't then turn around and say, well, like I want the guardrails to allow us to radicalize people a little bit this way because that gets my party more votes.
Before you answer that, Alex, real quick, just in case anyone doesn't know what Ben is talking about, because he says what's going on in Florida, PragerU, which is featured in your documentary.
Yes.
DeSantis, the governor of Florida, has just said we should bring PragerU into the schools, into the public school system. And of course, they're now famous, not just from YouTube, but also for creating all these quote unquote educational videos, which are climate science denying and all kinds of other things.
In the entire state of Florida, they just got rid of AP psychology classes because they talk about gender at all. We're talking like seniors in high school, like 17, 18-year-old kids not being able to take an AP psychology class anymore because it violates weird state guidelines.
Sorry for interrupting, Alex. I think go for it. Yeah,
that's a really good example. Yeah, I think that my opinion on this is that there has always been a need to fight. If you look at, even recent history, like the civil rights era fights, meant that were so vigorous and pushed things forward so much over those years, and so many of that progress being rolled back, and then the need to continue to fight. Good trouble, right? As the phrase went. And I think what we're learning. My feeling about technology is the same feeling I have about civic politics, which is if you fall for the ruse that there is two sides, right? When the only two sides there are absolutely verifiable truths, and there are ideologically driven lies, and that's disinformation. So I'm not just talking about misinformation, which is I'm just wrong, because we can all be wrong. I'm talking about intentional disinformation, right? Yeah. Which is the earth is flat. And the flat earth movement largely grew out of an anti-government movement that was funded by a lot of very ideologically driven people that wanted to draw more people over to this anti-government side so that they could become empowered. So the the sad reality of it is if we don't get involved, right? If we don't fight the fight, then we do give rise to autocratic governments, and we will lose our rights. And so the best way to look at this in recent history is Dobbs, right? Is the loss of Dobbs, and women, whether they're Republican or Democrat, losing their reproductive rights. So you can't say, well, the government, because of civic fighting that went on for decades, the government implemented certain safeguards for women to be able to have reproductive rights that have now been reversed. And that shows us that, like it or not, we do need to use the tools of government. We do need to fight. And to your point, yes, what if we have safeguards in place that protect people from disinformation, and a dictator takes over America and reverses those and starts, to your point, says, okay, now I'm going to take these rules and now you're the disinformation, you're the enemy. Well, hey, guess what? I hate to say it, we have to fight that.
Yeah.
And it just means that everyone has to get involved. And what worries me about our current climate is it's very easy to straw man certain issues. And right now there's a big anti-technology backlash. And a lot of people are just saying, well, just don't get on these platforms. Don't use these communities. Well, it doesn't work that way. Like, our children are on these communities because they're important communities to them. And they do provide an enormous amount of benefit, despite a lot of propaganda that states the inverse. And what we need to do, instead of saying just put these technologies down, which you're not going to go anywhere, so you're doing the tech companies a favor when you say that, because you're removing yourself from the fight, is you need to be literate. Like, you actually need to engage with these technologies. You need to know how they work. You need to know what's good about them and what's bad about them, because they're not going anywhere. And if we don't fight, I guarantee you that your rights will get taken away. I guarantee you there will be more propaganda and not less propaganda.
Oh, wow.
It's exhausting. But look at the strike. Like, look at what we're doing every day. Like, I think that we saw this sort of creeping realization hit people in our industry, where they're like, well, surely the AMPTP is going to come to the table. And then it was like, oh, well, maybe they're not. Oh, well, maybe I've got to hit the streets. Maybe I need to learn more about the issues. Like, what is going on? What are the residual issues? What does a mini room issue mean? Like, you saw all this discourse going on in our industry of, like, people getting hyper educated within the first few months, once they realized that, like it or not, they couldn't just sit this out. Like, they couldn't just wait for somebody to do the right thing. It just wasn't going to happen.
And there's really no feasible way as a culture, like, this is basically what you're saying, that we could go on strike against YouTube or any of the social media giants. I kind of admire my friends who...
There isn't even a union. There's no labor union. I mean, the influencers don't have a union. There's no creative content union.
Well, so, I mean, like, what would be the answer? I mean, if there was...
There should be a union. They should unionize. They desperately need to unionize the influencer.
How? Oh, man.
Yeah, let me jump in real quick. I think that
it's just a brilliant idea, but I'm like, it's hurting my brain to think how that could work, because... it would be like if there was only one movie studio. If Universal Studios was the only movie studio, I guess everyone could go on strike against them. But also, and you always hear this, there'd be a line out the door of people wanting to get into Universal Studios to get to make something. And with YouTube,
that's the monopoly is the big problem. And we talk about this in the movie. And we need to break these companies up. And that is not going to happen anytime soon. What may happen, because they have so much lobbying power, what may happen sooner is that they may start to see legitimate competition, because of where we're at in this inflection point in the industry, where if you're Amazon, if you're Apple, if you're another tech company, you're looking at YouTube going, and Google, which owns it, you have the capability to eat all of this without even impacting your profit margin much. And you've got to be thinking about infiltrating that industry and creating competition. And eventually that will happen. Eventually they will not be the only game in town. That's inevitable. It's just a question of how long that takes.
One of the things that I found very interesting this year, going back to VidCon, being out of the pandemic and talking with some of the creators who were there, who were getting education on how to produce their channels, so many of the people that I spoke to did not even realize that they were in fact businesses, that they were making money. And, like, for example, when there was government bailout for businesses during the pandemic, there was this huge swath of creators who had legitimate businesses who never applied for the government aid for them while they were doing it. And I feel like if there was a bunch of people, if there was a huge group of creators that maybe did form a union and did decide that they were going to strike, I feel like there's so many people who just want to step up and take their place. The idea of crossing a picket line to the next generation in this space, everyone has this consumer mindset. The mindset is consumers. The mindset is, how quickly can I get what that other person has? I've heard the number one aspiration now of high school seniors is to be a YouTube creator, not a movie star, not to work in Hollywood, not to be an astronaut.
Yeah. Well, you don't have to leave your living room. I mean,
Yeah.
It's an interesting shift, and that shift has happened in less than a generation. It
has. The thing that gives me hope about it, though, is that there's a lot of talk about there not being gatekeepers in the democratization of internet culture, which there's an element of truth to that, obviously, and there's an aspect of that I think is actually one of YouTube's greatest assets, and one of the things that it's given our culture that is a really good thing. That you can have Natalie Wynn on ContraPoints having a giant following, just as much as someone on the right or whatever, or your standard kind of white American dude is more likely to get a voice than someone in a small African country who's getting a huge following. However, they're not just getting a huge following because they're slapping on headphones and going in front of their webcam. They have to provide a service that people want. And there's many, 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 many people, majority of people, who say they want to be influencers who realize within the first few weeks that ain't going to happen. And nobody wants what they're selling, and they don't have any, and they should really go find a job. And so it's really, in a way, not much different than when I was young and the movie Fame came out and everybody wanted to go do that. And the musical theater and drama schools got flooded with people. When I went to film school, I went to NYU Film School, everybody wanted to be Jim Jarmusch or Spike Lee. And they'd get to, in my freshman year class at NYU, there were 2,000 people. Sophomore year was 750. There was 300 people 30 people by senior year. 30.
That's quite a lot.
And I
of
wasn't even one of them. I dropped out in junior year to go make Lost Boys, but that's a whole different story. But my point is that there's always some generational thing that looks like it's the shiny object that you want, that you then, and I've got 3 kids, right? One of whom is already out of college, one's in college, and you look at them and go, they're there, entertaining this folly, and they go find themselves, and they're like, well, that was a disaster. And so, there are gatekeepers. There are both gatekeepers within the internet to a degree in terms of what the zeitgeist is and what type of creators actually rise. And then there is just the public's appetite and who they decide is going to do well. So I'm not, to your point about the unions, I don't think just because you have a union, it means that everyone goes on strike on day one. I think that it's, you just said it yourself, it's the ability to collective bargain. It's the ability to say, let's get everyone's voice together, and it's also the ability to educate. Look how well, one of the most amazing, I'm sorry to keep going back to the labor strike, but it's kind of a big deal, right? Both for my industry and for everyone's industry. Yeah. And I was so, I've been in SAG since 1977. I've watched so many strikes happen in the unions, and because of the internet, and because of where we are economically right now, this is the first strike where within the first few weeks of even the WGA strike, I was like, SAG and DGA and WGA are talking. Oh, here's IATSE. Oh, here's, the Teamsters. And now everyone's talking. Now there's people in unions that aren't even related to my union. Now there's people who are PAs that don't even have a union. And and we're all talking and we're sharing stories and we're talking about our labor issues. And I'm in my late 50s. I learned an enormous amount about other unions and what their issues are and how they get paid and how they don't get paid. And that was super helpful for me. And so the idea of a union at its very least just being a way for there to be collective discourse and for workers to be able to talk to each other. And then that has huge power cross union. If you looked at what happened with the Teamsters, where we were forming solidarity with their UPS skirmish, which they ended up averting a strike. I mean, not because of us at all, but I just mean we were okay, you strike, we've got your back. They were like, we've got your back. And there's enormous labor power in that. So suddenly YouTube isn't, even if it's a monopoly, it's not so powerfully siloed anymore because their workforce, they're basically the creators of their profit are now plugged into the greater labor workforce. And I think that would be an enormously positive step forward, you know.
It's so interesting to think about how you go about doing that, but also that like so many, like I think, you know, being a YouTube influencer or having a YouTube channel is something there's plenty of people, you know, over the age of 20 who are doing it, but like that specific culture, and I feel like Smosh typifies that, even though those guys are probably in their mid 30s at this point.
Yeah, they're really old
by YouTuber standards.
I know, I'm kidding.
But like, I think
just
about
depressing
like,
as hell. But yeah.
Well, like Machinima, you know, the story with Machinima was that they would get these like 14-year-old kids into 10-year contracts and basically own everything they did, and it's like that kid wasn't even old enough to really be allowed to sign that contract. And you know, to them it seemed like, oh, I'm making all this money, but YouTube in general is like it's a bugaboo of mine that we're in the content business, because it sort of makes the container the important thing. The content is the whatever crap you put in there. YouTube is this perfect container with its algorithm and the way it presents and how you can link it and all that cool stuff. And then it's like, and then all the people out there in Crazy Town will just make whatever, we'll put it on, and it'll, you know, and that thinking permutates all through Netflix, Amazon Prime, blah blah blah. Everything becomes content. Nothing's an event. Nothing's about the art. It's about the container. But I wonder about, like, because it's so youth centered, and when you're 20 years old, you're not thinking about joining a union. You're not thinking about health benefits. How do we make this an attractive thing to somebody who is starting out and trying to make a name for themselves in that world?
I think it's education. I think it's people realizing that they do have an option. And I think that, because what happens is, sure, you've got all the people who are clamoring to get in and become, you know, whomever, the next Natalie Wynn or the next Smosh or whomever it is. But you also have a lot of people who are doing well, who are young, who don't have any protection, don't have any regulation, don't have any benefits, don't have any labor laws wrapped around them, and they're suffering for it. And I mean, you raised the issue yourself. There's a strike, you know, there's a labor crisis that comes along, or a pandemic, and they can't work, and they don't know enough to know they should be getting benefits, right? And so they're not sustaining themselves. And corporations have never been, you know, historically the place to save you. The container, as you put it, is concerned with the profit to the container and elevating that brand. And it's always fallen on unions. That's why I've had union health insurance since I was 18 years old. It's like, it's always fallen on unions, or other ways of educating the workers as to what their rights are. So, I mean, look, we're in an industrial revolution. That's the whole reason we made this doc. Everything is moving super fast. And we're now at a point where workers are being devalued all over the place. And in our industry, you know, I bristle, talk about YouTube, I bristle when I see like one of these like boutique indie companies, you know, referring to the new movie as like their movie. I'm like, it's not your movie. With all due respect, I don't care about you very much. I don't care that you've got a cool brand that is on Letterboxd all the time. I'm interested in who actually made that film, right?
Yeah.
I mean, who wrote it, who directed it, who acted it. I don't care about your cutesy little distribution company. And they'll be like, you know, this company presents a film by this company. I'm like, it's not a film by you, right? It's a film by workers, and they brought it to you or you bought it from them. But, you know, you have a brand, all due respect, but you are, as you said, you're the container, and you're going to be profiting off of the success of someone else's work. And I just think that it's a very critical shift that sort of speaks to the Uberification of the workforce, where you become a gig worker, you know, for some brand. And you're like, but the brand's attitude is like, hey, you're lucky you're working for this brand. This brand is super cool. You know, your son is wearing a t-shirt with our brand's logo on it. That's how cool we are. And it's like, well, I don't care. Pay me.
I got a question. You bring up indie films and the indie film studios, and in some ways, the people out there who are on YouTube, and certainly the most successful ones, and I'm thinking of like, you know, the Mr. Beasts and stuff, who are making huge amounts of money from this. At some point, there is going to be creators who do not need this system anymore. They do not need the system that has built them. Do you think that there is going to be incentive for them to start to create their own networks, their own worlds, their own indie studios, their own platforms, so to speak? Or do you think it might move more decentralized, where anyone will, in their garage or in their living room or whatever it is, start to be less reliant on the big platforms, or does it become this, media, they talk about streaming wars. Is it going to be creator wars where, everyone decides that they're going to have their own silo, their own thing, and they're going to lock people into like a new studio system where only these creators can appear on these platforms? I've put a lot of thought into this. I'm really curious to hear, like if, what does your crystal ball say? Which direction do you think we're going? Is it all of the above? Cream always rises. What's going to happen? Any thoughts at all?
Sure, of course. I mean, we're on all these WhatsApp threads due to the strike, and one of them that's been very robust is one that's looking into creating independent studios for artists, and it's a very big concern at the moment given the strike. And there's a lot of people who are very smart doing a lot of legwork investigating how to create independent studios, which I think is an amazingly great thing and should be, vigorously pursued and investigated. And however, I think that the friction between the worker and the people who own the means of power has always been there forever and ever and ever since the wheel, and that is human nature, and that is a kind of 4-year-old in the sandbox grabbing a Tonka truck and then realizing he's big enough to grab everyone's Tonka truck. And then suddenly he's got all the Tonka trucks. And, you can evolve as a human being and get to a really great place. And then you have kids and you watch your kids do the exact same thing.
Doing it
and
right now.
Yeah, exactly. And look, D.W. Griffith hated the studio system. And Frank Capra very famously broke off from the studio system, claiming that it was onerous and that there needed to be independent studios for artists. After that, you had around that time, you had United Artists, which did that. And then you had the 70s revolution that did that. And we're living in... I watched this happen when I did the Napster story, because Napster was really created by very ideological young people who wanted to create this sort of utopian community for artists that ended up getting co-opted and used in exactly the opposite way of what their vision was, which was just to enrich a handful of oligarchs at the expense of all the artists. And that's what just happened to the music industry. And we're watching it happen to the film and television industry right now for exactly the same reasons. And so... I don't have a lot of... There's always going to be people who want to acquire power and who will exploit people in order to gain more power and to profit off of those people. That is just human nature, sadly. So there may be some version of all the above of what you just said, but there's a reason why Mr. Beast is still on YouTube. YouTube gives him access to the 4.6 billion views a day that no other platform on earth comes anywhere even close to. And if he steps off of that and creates his own thing and sees what his life is like when he gets thousands or tens of thousands of views a day or whatever it is, that's a tricky place to be. And there's only a few people who could even get away with attempting that. So I think that there are models of people who have done independent stuff. They're usually already so successful that they're just taking an ecosystem that exists from over here and they're moving it over there. But generally, they've needed a legacy ecosystem of some kind in order to gain that success and that following. So I'm very skeptical of artists being able to create wholly independent frameworks that don't already have massive success within these industries. And I'll be very curious to see how that would monetize.
You and me both.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of goes back to the content container question, because, the people who are making this stuff nothing would exist on YouTube if people weren't making it and putting it on there. YouTube, like you said, doesn't really make its own stuff. And yet, even though these people are learning how to shoot, learning how to edit, sound design, add music, they're getting, Douglas Fairbanks didn't have the money to have his own film laboratory and his own film stock manufacturing and own his own cameras and his own sound stages, but these people have that at their fingertips, basically the equivalent of that, and yet they still need this. They still need the algorithm.
Distribution. Yes.
They need distribution, and they need access to infrastructure. Entertainment requires a lot of infrastructure, even if it's just you on your laptop. And there was that famous Coppola quote that one day a little kid in Ohio is going to make a movie that's going to be the best movie in the world. And it's like, that's true. But I guarantee you that the next movie that kid wanted to make they'd either want to be Mr. Beast or directing the next Marvel movie. Yeah. And you see it in the independent film world all the time. You see someone who is the most ideological, artistic purist, artist who's come up independently making small independent movies that do well. They grab that big action movie. They grab that 10-part series for the streamer. And that is usually the end goal for most of these artists, is to do something on a much bigger, more monetizable scale. And that's very hard to do if you have a little mom and pop creative entity. And to your point, that's competing with 10,000 other mom and pop creative independent entities. It's really hard to see how that scales.
Yeah. I don't know what the Napsterification of the YouTube creator economy looks like, but just
I think we're living in it. I think the Napsterification of the economy is what's happening in streaming, where you now you're playing whack-a-mole with all of these different AI, like open source AI companies, and like everyone has access to all this radical technology. There's a million streaming companies. None of them are really monetizing the artists. It's just like after they killed Napster and you had like LimeWire and Grokster and an infinite, and then eventually legitimate ones like the iTunes store and Spotify, which continue the same practice of not paying anybody anything. Oh, yeah. So I think we're living through the Napsterification of the film and TV industry.
Yeah. It's interesting because I do sort of feel like a lot of it even started with kind of piracy. And this is totally off topic of your film, but like I feel like the streaming stuff is almost a reaction to Pirate Bay and BitTorrent and all that stuff. So they figured out, okay, well, here's the way that we'll make it so that you don't need to steal it, but then they ended up just stealing the money from the artists.
Well, the miscalculation there, which we were trying to get people to understand back in the Napster days, is that you could have both. There was always been attrition. And I think there was the famous Wolverine case where Wolverine leaked early and Fox freaked out. And then they realized it was the best possible promotion they could have had, and the movie did gangbuster business. And for years, we were trying to tell people that piracy was not killing the entertainment industry. It was a legitimately unethical piece of breakage within their industry, but it was not terminal. And so I think that a course correction around that was misguided. But I also think it's really what you just said. I think that they had dollar signs. I think that they were like, well, if we take the entire ecosystem that's over here, the public, and we move them off of watching linear TV and movies, and we like lock them into our own little ecosystem, we can then make a fortune, which of course they did, but at the expense of not only the artists, but of the survival of the industry itself, which is where we've now found ourselves.
Well, and with a company like Netflix, they have to like make professionally produced TV shows and movies that could compete with anything you would see in a movie theater or on HBO or network television.
Which we're learning is hard to do, right?
Yeah, and they have to have like a fire hose of it pointed at the viewer, whereas YouTube, in a way, figured out, let's make the viewers make all the content. And
it's the MTV model. Well, we're gonna be an ad driven. We're not a subscription based service. We're an ad driven service that utilizes content that we do not spend a dime creating. I mean, that's what MTV did. But the only thing I'd like to reiterate is just that, unlike a lot of where we are with streaming, which I think is largely negative and not productive or monetizable or additive to the consumer or the artist, I do think that what Google and YouTube have done, and what a lot of these platforms are doing in that world, is largely a net positive. I know that's in this current climate a controversial thing to say, and I don't mean it that way. But I do, all three of my kids are on YouTube all the time. I've never taken them off. 2 of them are grown. They're fine. They didn't get black pilled. They're very intelligent. They like to read and go outside and do stuff. I think that there's a lot of misinformation around the harms. So while I think the monetization of disinformation is an extremely important and dangerous issue, and they do need to be regulated, and there does need to be changes in the way they function, I think that we as a culture need to stop othering these technologies and looking at them as something that is separate from everyday life, and understanding that they are really part of the community. The human community has evolved into these spaces. They're not separate from us, and they're not going away. And look how we're talking. Look how we survived during COVID. Look how that's enabled the strike force to be so effective. All of that is because of the growth of online community and the robust nature of these technologies. So I just think that we need to get the pendulums, which swung too far one way, then it swung too far the other way. I think the general cultural place we need to sit is more in the middle of like, these things are it's like the automobile. You don't want to stop driving your car, you just want a seatbelt in it. I think that's just a very important point to drive home.
I think that's a great place to leave it.
Oh my God! Thank you so much. This is just profound. I'm going to be digesting this all day.
This is so much fun. Alex, it's always a treat having you on the show, and I'm so glad we got to do it again. We're going to be spreading the word about this movie, and I hope that a lot of people get to see it because it's really it's really
important. I don't
important
say that
piece
easily.
of work. No, I don't either. It's an important piece of work that people should be looking at. So.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Well, it's great to be here as always, and we'll keep fighting the fight till somebody finally gives us a deal we can take.
Or they'll just scan you and have your avatar to accept the bad deal. Yeah.
But then we're just gonna have reams and reams of garbage content that nobody wants to watch, which is my argument against that future. But yeah.
Have you seen this trend of people like pretending that they don't really exist? I think it's only a matter of time between all the Zoom meetings are going to be avatars talking to each other, and it's like, holy crap. There's a dystopian future that's heading our way.
People talk about AI writing and producing content. I'm like, if we could just teach the AI to watch it and enjoy it, then they can go have it all.
Perfect. Precisely. Yeah. Give them the streamers.
Replace them.
Watch these.
I'm gonna go watch a play.
I'll go back to the movies or the theater. Yeah,
you'd be the best. Live music. Anyway.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks so much.
Guys. Yeah. Bye-bye.
All right. So that was Alex Winter. That was so much fun.
I could have talked to Alex all day and all night. He's such a fascinating and smart guy, and his insights are, I don't know, I follow him on social media, and I feel like he's one of those people who ends up on what I consider to be the right side of every argument. Like he's and he does it without being confrontational or a douchebag. He's a genuinely interested, nice, cool guy. So,
agree. It's always great talking to him. Anyway, so Ben, guess what?
What?
We got to pay some bills.
Yay.
Now with video. We have to thank our fine friends over at Aperture makers of incredible lighting products. They have been specializing in entry-level products for professionals, and they have a couple of different lines of products, including Amaran, which is the really entry-level, sort of more of a creator tool, which I think is very appropriate for all the stuff that we're talking about today. But
my God, yeah. I didn't realize that it was going to be such a theme show, but yeah, keep going.
It's totally gone that way. But Aperture is trying to level up. They are trying to level up not only from, sort of the creator world, because they really kind of started as creator products, but they want to be in rental houses. They want to be on professional sets, and they have been getting some success in both of those areas in the last couple of years. And they have announced a couple of new lights, but one I want to talk about in particular, but it doesn't have a price and it doesn't have a release date. It is very, very interesting. It is a 1500 watt. That is powerful. 1500 watt LED with full color. So RGB WW, they call it the Electrostorm CS15. I know it just rolls off the tongue, but the Electrostorm CS15 would be the brightest and biggest full color LED light that they have ever made. At 1500 watts, it is more than double their 600C, which is their current brightest full color RGB. And with lights this size, as they're getting up to this side, and cameras getting more and more efficient, it means you can illuminate huge areas without needing tons and tons of units. It only exists in prototype form, so who knows, maybe it will shift a little bit by the time it is released, but with these levels of brightness and this amount of, I want to say relatively minuscule amperage, it's probably going to be able to be powered on a 20 amp household circuit. we're talking about a huge amount of light that just, not that long ago, you could not get from anything over at Aperture. It's very impressive, the direction it's going. So thank you, Aperture, for sponsoring the show. We can't wait to get more information about the Electrostorm CS15.
And now, short ends.
So Ben, it is short end time. What is your obsession of the week? What are you all about? What are you into?
Well, I want to say I didn't mean to be so in lockstep with the rest of this episode being, VidCon and the YouTube effect. But something that has caught my attention is a YouTube channel, and it's from somebody who you introduced me to. Oh. Holy crap, 20 years ago.
Oh my God, really?
Michael Cioni. And I know we've talked about Michael on the show many times. So Michael Cioni, when you introduced me to him, he was one of the people running a company called Plaster City Digital Post. Mm-hmm. And it was like early days of high-end digital cameras. And part of their business model was basically that they would digitize your footage and online your footage. And they were using like Final Cut Pro workflows and stuff like that. They had they went from having like one small office in Hollywood to having like a pretty amazing facility on Sunset Boulevard. Then he left there, founded Light Iron. Then he left Light Iron and worked for Frame.io, I believe. And then Frame.io got sold. And so he has started a YouTube channel for his new venture, which is called Strata. Are you familiar with this at all?
I am. I've spoken with Michael about it extensively.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know Michael Cioni, he's like one of the most engaging and intelligent speakers you'll ever know. He almost comes across as too enthusiastic, like
that is him legitimately. That is his authentic self. He is so enthusiastic.
Exactly. When you talk to Michael in person, he is so much like the guy he's so Strata, which is this new company that he's founded, like he left Frame.io. I think that was the last one that he was at. And he formed this company with his brother and some other people, and they're creating like AI solutions for workflows for filmmakers. And what he's doing is he's making these mini documentaries and posting them on YouTube about the process of putting together, the process of pitching to venture capital. And just this week alone, he did an episode that was about the difference between pitching an idea to Hollywood versus pitching it to Silicon Valley, because he's kind of doing both. And he shows, he talks about his love of things like Apple's Keynote and how he loves to put together pitch decks, and he's kind of walking through the whole thing. It reminds me a little bit of the first Gimlet podcast, which I believe was called Startup, in which the founder of Gimlet was kind of walking us through his process trying to raise money after he had worked for NPR for 20 or more years, and it's fascinating to watch Michael's process. I don't know if Michael would even remember me. I haven't talked to him in a number of years, but I've always found him to be an impressive and engaging guy. And I can't wait to see what they do with Strata and what that company becomes. But I also think that this series that he's creating for YouTube is actually pretty instructive for like how to put together an idea, how to pitch it, how to have a vision. And what's interesting about Michael is, and again, I'm not saying anything you're not going to get if you watch this, is that like they started not even exactly knowing what they were going to do, but they kind of had an area. And so it's sort of watching them drill down and figure out what that's going to be. Anyway, I'm finding these videos fascinating, and each time a new one drops, I think there's only 3 or 4 at this point. Each time a new one drops, YouTube is like, hey, would you like to watch this? And I'm like, yeah, can't wait. So, my hat's off to Michael Cioni. I think everyone could use a little Michael Cioni in their life, and definitely check out Strata.
There's a whole story, which I'm hesitant about going into the whole story now. There's probably just not time for it. But Michael Cioni was almost on the podcast like 3 times. Twice we recorded with him, and various external forces kept those interviews from actually making the show. But now that he's got his own company and there are no external forces and there's no one to put the kibosh on that, I say that we get him back on here and we have him talk about this. I'm sure that he'd love to, I'm sure he'd love to go into more detail. I'm sure he'd be just as enthusiastic. And I'm also convinced 100% that he will remember you, Ben. I don't think you directed a project, very, very early on that he was, very, very instrumental and aware of, in the early days of digital capture, back before anyone really had ever, caught digital images, moving digital images in high definition to solid state media. We did a project and you directed it, and I'm sure that Michael will remember that, because that was a big deal back in 2005. So
yeah, that's true. That's true.
Anyways.
Anyway, so Ilya, what is your obsession of the week? You said it was weird, so I can't wait.
Well, I don't know if it's exactly weird. I mean, look, every once in a while, these market research firms come out with studies that you can't find. They only sell them to people with deep pockets. And it's usually like, industry related market research. So a group called Maverick did a study of the creator economy. And, this may be not that weird, but there is an organization out there called Digital Information World. And we will put a link in the show notes over at Cam Noir so anyone can read the sort of synopsis of the study that Maverick put on, where they basically surveyed a bunch of different creators at different levels and different genders and different everything to find out how much money people were actually making in the creator economy. 51%, more than half of the people who were earning money in the creator economy were earning less than $500 per month. So if you really want to talk about the inequities and the abilities of some people to make huge incomes, the essentially the A-list Hollywood of creator economy, it's this very minuscule number of people. And there are people who are making more than that. There was a certain number of people who are making around $10,000 a month, which is like $120,000 a year. That is a very solid, respectable income. But that number still is way smaller than what I think most people out there think that their favorite creators or people out there are earning. And this is a lot of channels and things that are between like maybe 5 and 50,000, subscribers per video, per whatever it is that they're doing. So they might have millions of subscribers, but the individual projects that they're putting out into the world, 5 to 50,000 views. So, it seems like, too, that most of the money that is coming in from them is not from the payouts that happen from the ad sharing revenue, but from personal deals that they work out with.
Of course, you see it all the time. I mean, like with, Corridor Digital, who we talk about here, in addition to having their own subscription website, most of their videos have a sponsor read, like they have an ad read that they have to do on the episode. Cinecom.net is always sponsored by Storyblocks, and they go into a thing about Storyblocks. And I feel like that's the only way to get to, honestly, to wrestle the control back. To me, the question about, if you were fully YouTube sponsored, the question would always be like, well, YouTube changes their algorithm and that will completely affect your fortunes, despite you doing nothing different. And you see YouTube creators complaining about this all the time, every time YouTube kind of changes how they do business, and they don't have to be all that transparent about it. So they just kind of change the way the algorithm, serves the video up to its pre-existing users. And those creators who would, you and I would have been getting a video, but more importantly, 15-year-olds across the world would have been getting the video by the truckload, and suddenly they don't, 1/3 of them get it. And suddenly that person's income, like their ability to pay their bills, just drops, and they haven't changed their mode of business or anything. All the same people want to watch their video, just the algorithm tweaks. So I feel like I'm sorry to get on a soapbox about this, but everybody, if you're going to make money at that, you kind of do need to have your own outside sponsorship.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, because this study also, or this survey, found that Instagram Reels and in-feed posts command slightly higher rates over TikTok and YouTube videos. I wouldn't have guessed that. I wouldn't have guessed that the Reels were sort of like the hotbed, the place that you can command the most money.
Man, I must be old too, because it's not that I don't watch them, but I never go out of my way to watch them.
Well, it's interesting. It's where people are making the money now in this creator economy. So very interesting to see where it's going and what's going on. And we'll put a link in the show notes if you actually want to get into digital information world and look at some of the information that's shared here. It's fascinating stuff. I think there'll only be more of it. So here it is. This was like the first all creator economy episode of the Cinematography podcast. I think it was interesting. It's definitely a little bit of a departure from our usual stuff, and we've got plenty more of our traditional stuff coming up. But I thought it was fun to offer a little bit of variety. It was
for those of you listening to our audio feed, we didn't mention this, but we are releasing this as the first ever video release of our podcast in a decade.
That's right.
We should have started the video earlier when we were both younger.
Yeah, that probably would have made a lot of sense. Yeah. Now they got to look at like old guys and.
Sorry about that, everyone.
Yeah, sorry. We're old.
Couple of gray beards.
All right, so Ben, I think that's just about going to do it for this episode. Where can people find you if they want to track you down?
Well, maybe Ben Katz can make a funky chyron, but you can go to benrock.com. Make sure to smash that like and subscribe. How about yourself?
Maybe Ben Katz can make something for me. I got a bunch of like headroom. Maybe you can put it up here. You can visit me at Hot Rod Cameras, hotrodcameras.com. That's where I'm at a good portion of the time. You can also find my LinkedIn. Maybe that would be over there or something like that.
Yeah,
LinkedIn. Yeah. And reach out. You need to build a studio. We're building some studios right now. That's kind of fun. Cameras, lenses, lights. We do all that stuff over at Hot Rod Cameras. That's my day job. I do very technical things Monday through Friday, which is why I love this podcast. I had 2 great interviews today, which we'll be getting into in the coming weeks.
Holy crap! I didn't know that I had 0 interviews today. Wow. Okay.
I had 2.
I gotta catch up.
Well, I was very glad to do them because we got to talk about a ton of stuff that was not technical. We got to talk about art, craft, and philosophy, and that was so much fun for me. And that's actually one of the reasons I love this podcast is we get to talk about stuff that isn't just ones and zeros, isn't just plugging cable A into slot B. We get to actually get into some of the the real stuff that life is made of. So
content. Sorry.
Exactly. Content. So, Ben, who do we have to thank this week?
Well, we have to thank Ben Katz, who had to do double duty and edit a video and an audio podcast. Although, again, my advice would be just edit the video and then make an audio output of it. But, again, Ben, you do you. It's none of my business how you do your job.
Here, let's give Ben Katz really details on exactly how we wanted to edit. So at 3 minutes and 45 seconds, go to the full screen of Ben, and then you can use me as a cutaway. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, so
let's not do that. Let's also thank Alana Cody, who has been kicking all the ass and getting us some amazing interviews. We have several coming up, including apparently 2 that you did today that I didn't even know about. I got left out of that loop. That's fine.
Right. You hadn't watched either of the shows.
That's fair. And last but never least, let's thank Kays Alatrachi, who created all of the music that you heard in this podcast. Kays can be found at musicbykays.com. Go there, check out his music. He's also a director. He's also a VFX artist. He's also a colorist. What else does this guy need to do to get your business? So anyway, that's it. Ilya, you want to take us out?
Thanks for watching.
Whoa!
For listening. Yeah, I know. Isn't that crazy?
That's crazy.
For watching.
This has been the Cinematography Podcast, presented by Hot Rod Cameras. Find your next camera, lens, or accessory on the web at hotrodcameras.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our show on iTunes and connect with us on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for listening.